Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Leah and I do true crime things while doing my makeup. If you're liking any of those two things, don't forget to subscribe. So I have been on a kind of series a little bit with the American Horror Stories. They have based a lot of their characters on real life people, or taken bits and pieces of those people and put them into the show, or just put the actual namesake into the show, which I found really interesting. And I went to the point where I did one on the Cecil Hotel and realized that during the season Hotel of American Horror Story, there was a cornucopia of people that are real life criminals and murderers that were in the show, played by different people, of course. It was really interesting. So today we'll be going over the character James March, who was played by the phenomenal Evan Peters. Hotel, ironically, had a very sketchy type of backstory to it. It fits right along with the fact that the person that I'm covering today built a murder hotel. Evan Peters portrayed a dapper, handsome, charismatic, and yet, above all else, murderous human being in the American Horror Story season Hotel. How very fitting for the man that he actually portrayed, who was H.H. Holmes, who is quoted of saying, "I cannot help the fact that I was a murderer, no more than a poet can help the inspiration to a song." So let's get started. Born on May 16th, 1861, as Herman Webster Mudgett. Now, I'm going to bounce between Herman and Henry. They are the same person, okay? Because at one point in time, Herman changes his name to Henry and becomes H.H. Holmes. And as always, I'm going to try to tell you what I'm going to be using on my face as we go along. If you guys do decide that you would prefer that I either list it below or put it in the video somewhere, go ahead and just leave a very nice comment about that. That is something you would prefer instead of me interrupting the story, but it's up to you. This is the Milani Precision Brow. And of course, as you can see, I'm going to be using the Hip Dot. I don't know which one this is. Hip Dot Zion Pressed Pigment Palette. It is cruelty-free, vegan, paraben-free, talc-free, mineral oil-free, and phthalates-free. I can't pronounce that word. He was born in Gilmanton, New Hampshire, and in his early years, you know, it didn't say anything really bad about him. Now, I did watch the movies that are on him, which one is called Murder Hotel and the other is called just H.H. Holmes. If you want to check into those, it's the ones that I have seen. The Murder Hotel one, it has a recording of his voice and it sounds just eerie. And so if you want to do that, go ahead, but it gave me goosebumps. And he said, "I cannot help that I've had the devil born in me, or in me." And I was just like, it was so freaky the way it sounded. I don't know. I mean, maybe legitimately that was a thing. But anyway, so those are some movies that you can watch if you want to learn more about him. And not just go by my my depiction here. As always, this is an entertainment channel. So if I do happen to get things wrong, go ahead and correct me nicely down below. And but otherwise, this is not meant to insult anybody. Definitely not any of the family members that are alive now or any of that. Okay? This is just for entertainment purposes. So Herman, you know, he was just a normal kid, except he started getting really interested in skeletons and, you know, just thinking that they were really interesting and all of that. So he had this interest in skeletons. which ultimately led him to having a more interest and maybe even morbidly interest in death. And it went so far as even like an obsession, and that's why we're talking about him. He really had his eyes on not just becoming like wealthy and well off, all that, but he also had his eyes on a very lovely, rich girl by the name of Clara Lovering. Oh yeah, he was in love with her. Or was he? Was he in love with her, or was he in love with her money? Because that's one thing that they said. He had his eyes on the rich girl. So that doesn't really sound like it was a love thing. But he knew that this rich girl could get him into pursuing what he really wanted to do, which was go to med school. Okay, so he graduated from high school at a really, young age. We would consider it was a young age. Maybe back then it wasn't a young age. It was like normal. He was 16 when he graduated high school. He was not a stupid person by any means. And in 1878, he ended up marrying Miss Clara Lovering. So he got the girl he wanted. So when he started medical school, he started in a very small medical school that was in Vermont. It was until he was accepted into the University of Michigan's medical school. So he went from like a small one to a bigger one. And on my eyebrows, I'm using the NYX brow glue. So for Mr. Herman, high school is pretty easy. He graduated 16, no big deal, super easy. But med school was not that easy for him. In fact, he had difficulty with all the information because I went to nursing school, and the information that you have to know is a lot. And like you have to know all the bones and muscles and arteries and veins, and it's just etc. and so on. You can get where I'm going with this. But Herman was not feeling this. He thought that this was just unnecessary extra information that he really did not need to know. And it was just too much for him to kind of really remember. But he kept on trucking, and he ended up making friends with someone there that worked on the staff. And I'm trying to remember if he was a janitor or someone who was like a groundskeeper. Just using my Ciate setting powder to set my base down so I can get a nice blending effect. This friend of his, he had like this side hustle, it was hard back then to find cadavers. Not everybody was like, hey, donating my organs and my body to research. Nope, that's not really what was going on back in these days. It was more like, hey, you kind of found them where you got them and then you just used them. So this guy that Herman, aka Henry, met had this side hustle of getting corpses wherever he could get them. And this was really cool for good old Mr. Herman. So even if they were found in unsavory ways, like murdered or other things, he would take this guy who worked there would take him these corpses, and they would use them as cadavers. If you guys don't know what cadavers are corpses that have been basically in some way preserved for medical students to work on. And so, I mean, how do you think they get to learn all the body parts? They actually have to work on these dead people to get the feel of how things really are in the body. Makes sense, right? And so they had a very big need for them. But also, Herman had a big need for it too, because he was really interested in these guys. He was like, this is what I want to play with. He would just travel his little tush right on down to the basement type area so that he could get his hands on the corpses. He really liked this. This was something that was really fun to him. He would take them and mutilate them, and then he would set them up to make them look like they had been in some sort of accident. All the while, he had taken out insurance policies on these already dead people, and he would collect the insurance on them. And so this is what he just kept doing, but he also really enjoyed the whole fact of taking them apart and doing a bunch of things like that, which, you know, it's good that he had that, especially if he was going to want to be a doctor. But the mutilation and, I mean, like, he would just do horrible things to these corpses. And collecting the extra money would help him out, right? So he was just collecting this insurance. He was starting his insurance fraud kind of thing. He seemed to be very much for himself. Numero uno. Well, he continued to do this throughout medical school. And then it came to the point for him to graduate medical school. Now, as smart as he was in high school, medical school was next level, like I had said before. And, well, he graduated at the bottom of his class. So much so that they had to re-vote for him to take his medical exam and become a doctor. Because they really just they just didn't have confidence in him at all. I mean, they should have gone with their gut, but, you know, they were probably just trying to give him a chance. Young married fellow. Plus, he was really charming, and he could pretty much talk people into a lot of things. You'll learn that as we go on in our tale. Instead of pursuing the medical profession, he decided to do teaching. So he would teach and have access to, like, it really didn't say where he taught, but it did say that he continued to go into the basement of the medical school and get these corpses. So when he's done with medical school, not only is he like, hey, I'm not going to teach. I'm not going to use this education that you paid for, Miss Lovering. But, yeah, I don't really know if I want to be married to you anymore. After she paid for all of his medical school and probably all of his nonsense, he was just questioning. Well, he was also questioning because he had met a young lady named Martha Belknap. Now, I'm going to say that very wrong a lot if I continue to say that, so we're just not going to say that very often. So Miss Martha was very beautiful. He was just like smitten kitten kind of thing. And he was ready to move on. He decided to, despite his marriage, get engaged to Miss Martha. Which, when people found out, this was a big scandal. Like, ooh, yeah, nope, you're married already, and stuff like that, right? So it kind of had a credibility slap on him because of his poor choices. Maybe he wasn't like this just great guy that people thought he was. And times were getting really rough. He had to sell the last 2 horses that he had just to make ends meet and get food and things like that, because it was just, times were tough at that point in time. But in 1885, he did move to Chicago, sent divorce papers out to Miss Lovering because he wanted to be with Martha. And while he was in Chicago, in 1885, he decided that he wanted to start up his old scam. Insurance fraud. This seemed like a really easy thing for him to do. And with doing that, he contacted an old friend from medical school. a Mr. Robert Laycock. So apparently they had some schemes in medical school. Maybe they were working together on these corpses, like selling them for insurance and all that stuff. Because, well, Robert was all too eager to just jump back into this whole situation. But the problem with this new scam is that they wanted to basically get a family, okay? And this is the inglot liner, pot liner. They wanted to get an entire family of corpses and then sell it off as a dead family. Just like Oda's family died and so sad, but really they were already corpses, right? But this proved to be a lot harder than what they were thinking it would be. They thought it would be like kind of easy peasy, lemon squeezy kind of thing. This scam, it was going to be like really big. He was going to get a whole family of corpses and cadavers and then make it look like they died and collect the insurance fraud. But it started raising, it would have raised a lot of eyebrows to take on that many. So one or two, okay. So he decided to change this scam to killing himself. We're going to be using the Rodale Soft Focus Glow Drops before our primer today. 1886, he started working at a pharmacy or drugstore. It depends on who you listen to, what you read on him as to which one it is. He starts working at this drugstore pharmacy thing and is paying money on this insurance claim that he is going to essentially fake his death and get the money off of. Now he has married Mirtha, divorced Miss Lovering, and is moving forward in his life with this plan. Miss Mirtha is not innocent in all this. She did know about the plan of him killing himself or falsifying killing himself and moving forward. She would always describe him as a loving, doting husband and father of their daughter Lucy. And we're going to be using Bye Bye Pores Primer by IT Cosmetics. As he was looking for a cadaver for himself, he didn't feel like any of the cadavers would live up to him or be able to be compared to him. In 1888, he was just down about it. We're going to be using Stay Naked Weightless Liquid Foundation by Urban Decay. By 1888, he was just down on it. He was like, this scam is just not working. He couldn't find what he wanted. He couldn't find, just nothing was just going as planned for him. And he just was like, I'm at my wit's end. I'm going to have to do something so that I can keep my word basically to my family and bring in this money. Because he'd been paying on it from the pharmacy that he'd been working at. So he was keeping up with these payments. And we all know insurance payments are not cheap. They're not. So he really wanted to get done with this scam and move forward with his life because he had bigger plans. But he ended up really down and out about it and ended up telling a cop that he was going to kill himself. And so that officer, as any good officer would, he hospitalized Mr. Herman. And he was in there for about 2 months. Like he concocts this new plan in his head, right? Great. He just keeps coming up with plans. And his new plan was that the reason why the cadavers weren't working is because, well, he needed someone fresh to be able to go with all his loveliness. Okay. So he checks out after 2 months. Done, good, gone, out. Peace out, right? Over it. We're going to use the 2 of the Naked concealers. So he decides that he's going to lure his best friend, Dr. Leacock, okay, lured him, murdered him with poison, and during his confessions later on, he did go into graphic detail about that. Like, he had a complete disconnect from people. He just didn't have that same feeling that we feel as human beings. So he murdered him. So he changes the gentleman's clothing, Dr. Leacock's clothing, into his clothing, and other probably personal items to make it look more like Herman, and dumps the body and collects the insurance money. And thus is born H.H. Holmes, Henry H. Holmes. Coincidentally, around this same year, the owner of the pharmacy dies. He just dies. And, he had an insurance policy. But with him dead, his wife would collect it. Well, she up and just went missing. Mr. Henry said she went to California. But he collected the insurance money from that. Now, if Homegirl went to California, wouldn't you think she would still collect that insurance money from her hubby? Yeah, I mean, I would think so. That's been her hubby. But no, it goes to Henry. Now we're switching over to Henry because he's changed his name. It's like, did we not stop and think about these red flags? Now Dr. Henry Holmes has this pharmacy and he's making money. He's also made some money off of a couple of insurance things now. I'm going to be using the Photo Focus Translucent Powder by Wet n Wild to set the rest of my face. But you see, Henry was always looking for bigger and better things. And he set his sights on the land across from the pharmacy and began to design his 3-story murder hotel. In 1889, he began building his murder hotel. It was also known as the Castle. And he went through multiple different construction crews because he really didn't want anybody to know the full extent of this place. We're going to be using the Casey Holmes Essence Powder Palette. It's got highlighters and 2 blushes in it. I'll probably mix the blushes together and put them on my face. Hiring and firing multiple crews, nobody would really know the actual full layout of the castle. And that was really important to him because he didn't want anybody to know his full agenda, perhaps. Because there were things in this place that would have raised red flags, especially if they were continuously building on it and someone was building the entire thing. They would have looked at it and gone, this seems sketchy. This was a pretty high-tech type of murder factory. It is actually referred to that as well. It became a very high-tech murder factory for that time frame. This place had all the gadgets, like every single gadget you could think of. It had gas piping that went through the rooms to have gas lighting. It also had gas piping to go through things that weren't so efficient or not so good for the people who stayed there, because he had like a vault where he could pump gas into it and kill his victims. He had trap doors. He had stairs that led to nowhere, or they led to somewhere but it was locked and shut. He had chutes that led to the basement. He had soundproof torture rooms. He had a glass furnace for what he said was good electricity and heating and all that, but it ended up using as his crematorium. He had stretching tables and dissecting tables in the basement because that was like his own personal laboratory. He had vats of acids to torture people and also decompose the bodies or the flesh. And then the bones were bleached, so they had buckets of bleach to make sure that they were white, nice and white. People who stayed there and actually lived to talk about it talked about how it was maze-like, so you could really get lost in this place. And it was, if we think about hotels nowadays, they're like, what, 14, 15, 16 floors and up. You know, this was 3 floors, and only really 1 to 2 floors were used for actual people, like living quarters and offices and things like that. So it was really different than what we would think of as a hotel now. But for it to be called maze-like and yet be so small to our standards, he strategically made this. Not just that, but he could move from room to room, like his office to through the back areas and down staircases and all of this stuff. When I was watching the video on it, they gave like a little kind of illustration of it. He could like literally get people from his office on the top floor into the basement without being caught at all. And in 1891, it was finished. Like, it was completely done. His murder factory was done. So he was probably really excited. He's like, yeah, now I can get this thing going. He had like a financier. He wasn't really happy with him, and he had ended up, you know, forging some checks, and he really just didn't want to deal with this guy. He was like, no, I'm not going to deal with him. I don't want to. So I'm just going to murder him. And he put him in the glass furnace. Doesn't say if he killed him first or just stuck him in the glass furnace. I would think that he killed him first. And then no more financial have to pay back this guy. You know, he had no care for human life. It was very, very obvious. So when he saw how good that this furnace worked, he was like, hey, there's my money going to work right there. And it was clean. Like, the guy just like died and then was disposed of, and it was just perfect for Henry. He was like, this is great, and I don't need anybody else helping me to do this because I can get it done and continue on my life. He also, he just got into the habit of just killing people. And if you stayed at his hotel, you had to have life insurance with him as the beneficiary. Now, I asked my husband this, if we had to get life insurance to stay at a hotel and have that person as the beneficiary, wouldn't that raise like a bunch of red flags? Like, why am I even going to stay here? But back then, this was probably not really thought of. They were probably just thinking he's covering his investment and stuff like that. But sadly, no. He was putting out ads to like really promote women in the workforce. So he wanted to offer opportunities for women to work, and he was offering them at his hotel, which these women would come and they would never be seen leaving. Like, they would just be gone. And as this went on, he got into this rhythm. You know, he'd kill them, and he was practicing different ways of killing them, and he would sell them. Either he would sell the full full corpse, which he turned into a cadaver, to the medical school, you know, sketchy, but he would sell them to that, and then on another chance he would end up, like, in some ways you have a look at a cadaver and it has no skin on it and it's got like all the muscles, so skinning was another thing. And sometimes they were alive while doing this, sometimes they weren't. It just depended on his mood. So for cadavers, he would make like $20 to $30 per cadaver. This was great money back then, you know? But he just kept on going. He had lots and lots of ideas. Like, when it came to business, he had all kinds of ideas in the business and the dead body situation. He ended up killing Charles Cole because he didn't want to pay rent to him anymore, which I didn't really understand that kind of situation there, because of the fact that if he owned the land and he built the property, did he automatically own it? Didn't he automatically own it? Or maybe this was like a banker type of person, but he killed him, and he killed him brutally. After this particular kill, he realized that he couldn't sell this corpse to the school because he had been bludgeoned to death, and he had to think of better ways to kill people without doing that. During this time, like I said, he had been testing out different ways of murder before. Now he really got into the swing of it, like, hey, yeah, well, I need to really, really think about how I'm going to murder these people if I'm going to make any profit of them. So he would do things like starve them, gas them, skinning, torturing, anything. He was finding different ways to murder them. And what he did find was he found that chloroform was his best friend when it came to murdering people. And, you know, people still use that today in certain ways. And trust me, I have no idea how people get their hands on this stuff, but they do. But this guy, at the time, you know, chloroform was used to probably like sedate people and things like that, to kind of perform surgeries. Well, he was using them to overdose them on chloroform so that they would die, and he would have a perfectly preserved corpse without having to go through all this other stuff. And it was probably relatively easy for him. Plus, he was getting it constantly, even from like people who were selling it. Like, you would think like doctors or pharmacists and things like that, which you can't go to a pharmacy now and be like, hey, I'd like some chloroform. Hi, thanks, please, you know, just give me some. No, you can't do that. After finding chloroform, this was the answer to all of his concerns of keeping the cadavers nice. So this is the murder factory. You know, he had them, you know, and kept going. He would lease out rooms to people, lease out offices. He had a transport box that he would transfer the corpses from him to whoever was buying them. And he had lined the box with tar so that it wouldn't leak out any of the fluids or blood or anything. So it didn't look as obvious, though I think if somebody was dragging a trunk along, I'd be a little bit like, what are you doing? During this time frame, he was still doing his insurance scam. You know, he's got all these dead bodies, and these people have just willingly, well, I did hear one that wasn't so willing, and he actually tortured and gassed him until he actually signed a like life insurance policy to give to him, and then killed him. Yeah. He was beyond like, hey, I'm doing this for the money now. He was doing this for the sheer pleasure of murdering people. And he was still working with his friend, Benjamin Peitzel, that he'd been working with for a while on insurance scams. So they were just kind of making bank on this. By now, he was roughly $250,000 from insurance scams, because I guess they weren't scams. He was the beneficiary, but he did murder the people. But he thought, like, okay, I am going through all of this, and I am disposing of bones. Now, when he, you know, like he had to cremate him or whatever, he was like, why am I doing this? The medical school obviously needs skeletons. So he hired a gentleman by the name of Charles Chappell to help put together these corpses' skeletons after they were stuck into the acid and the skin was all removed and all of that. And so he just, I mean, I don't think that it's not like these people were like getting in on this and like, oh, why are these people disappearing and you're getting all this insurance money, and yeah, I'm making money off of it, but you're not questioning, that person isn't questioning why they're getting all this money, right? That doesn't make sense to me. Like, if money is just showing up and you're just getting this money, I don't know why you're not questioning the actual hows and whens and what's going on. And if you're in this with him, you kind of want to know the rest of everything that's going on. Nope, they didn't ask questions. They were making their money. They were happy. Okay, fine, whatever. So with these bones being bleached, like I said, there was a vat of like bleach and stuff. I don't know if it was a vat or if it was like a tub or something, but it bleached the bones. So they were nice and white to be hung. And people were just excited. Medical schools were excited about having these really good skeletal, you see them, they like hang up in like doctor's offices and stuff. The medical schools were really excited to have these things, these examples to go over and point out where the tibia and fibula were and all of this stuff, because it was so accurate. They're like, whoa, how is this so accurate? It's so good, right? Because it was a dead person. Yeah, hope y'all realize that now. And off of these skeletons, he was making more than just off of the cadavers. He was making about $175 profit off of each skeleton. So, I mean, that's definitely more than the cadavers. And we're going to go ahead and curl our lashes, and then we're going to use some CoverGirl Lash Blast in the clean formula on our lashes. I have not used this in forever. So he just kept on trucking along. He was like, hey, I got this. You know, I'm making all this money. Everything's going well. Nobody's raising any eyebrows on me. And by now, you know, he was pretty charming. So it wouldn't surprise me if, like, a lot of girls had interest in him and things like that. In fact, it did say that he was very charming and that lured in a lot of women, despite the fact that he was married. And as you know, by now, 1892, his murder castle is just all in full swing, luring people in, murdering them, prepping them, and then selling them to whoever he needed to sell them to make the profit, which was getting most of the stuff and a lot of the remains out of his hotel. This is the Catrice Prime and Fine little thing. I thought I'd actually do a little bit of contouring for you guys today, since I don't usually do it. I don't very often. I just use bronzer usually. So by now, you know, like I said, it was, you know, he was in full swing. So in 1893, the World's Fair came to Chicago. As you can assume, this gave him all kinds of victims. Like, this gave him the ability to get his hands on whatever type that he wanted. He could just get his hands on it. And we know he didn't have a problem with killing whoever or age, sex, race, any of that. He didn't care. He just liked to kill. And with that being said, he literally did just that. It gave him a plethora of people to just murder. They would come in to stay, and then he would murder them, get the money for the beneficiary, and then they would die, and he would get the money. So by now, he had a backlog of so many people that he had killed. He had a backlog of people in the basement that he just couldn't get rid of, which probably wasn't exactly what he had wanted to do because he had a system. He was getting rid of all of these people that he had killed, and nobody else was really asking questions. Which, I don't know why people weren't asking questions. I even wonder, like, if it had smelled, but being that deep in the basement, maybe it didn't smell. But as charming and murderous as he was, he also had a problem with women. Like, he just couldn't keep it together when it came to marriages. So, by now, he was already pursuing another young lady, Miss Minnie Williams. Now, with Miss Minnie, she had a sister. He brought her to town, got rid of her, murdered her, train station, just said, like, she never showed up. And he actually, there is some skepticism as either he was married or engaged to Miss Minnie, but because some things show that she was one of his spouses and other things show that they were just engaged. But he was really, like, he had become entangled with this woman, and I wonder where wifey was, like wifey and daughter. You know, it's like, hi, did you forget about these people over here? You know, that they had been around for a little while now. But it seemed like every couple of years, like, he was just chirping along to another somebody else. So what he ended up doing was he murdered her sister through poison and obviously disposed of her. And in his confession, he murdered Minnie and poisoned her. And this is the only murder out of only God knows how many murders that he committed that he actually regretted, because he thought he might have loved her. I'm going to use some Milani setting spray. So he kills Minnie, who might have been someone he loved. But he also wasn't done there, because, you know, I mean, Henry had a lot to do, you know, a lot of people to kill, apparently. I'm using the Skin Kiss Revolution Makeup Revolution highlighter. He's been doing this for some time now, right? He's been doing his thing for some time, right? He had come to the point where he was just like, I don't need Benjamin Peitzel anymore. I'm good. I'm doing my thing. I've got all the things that I need, and I don't really need him to help me scam people. I already know how to do this. I figured it out. I've been doing it for a little while now, right? Well, unfortunately for Benjamin Peitzel, he decided to, Henry decided to murder him. And that was his friend for a long time, but he really did not seem to give a crap. And just so you know, the reason why you see more of it is, like, I have a light, like, right here that is, like, shining on that. See, that's why you can see that. See that highlighter so well. And I'm going to take the same highlighter and put it underneath my brow bone and in my inner corner to tie the eye look together. So unfortunately, he decides to kill his friend Ben. But he didn't just kill him in the easy way. The way he killed him was very brutal. He bound him and then covered his body in some form of accelerant and then set him aflame. And in the description of this, now that's horrible. Like, let's just be real, that's horrific. In his confession, he did not, like, feel bad about it. He was talking about it, and he said he knew he should feel bad about it. And even at the end, as he was begging for his life to be just put out of his suffering because he was being burnt alive, that's when I think that's, like, the most painful way to die. He just didn't. He just let him die like that. And he talked about how he should have felt something for that, and he just didn't. He just didn't feel anything. But sadly, we are not done, because once he got to Benjamin Peitzel, he knew that his family knew that he had been working with him, with Henry, and that they would be problematic. For lips today, I'm using the collab that Luis Torres did with Beauty Creations. I forgot to hit record when I put my lip liner on. But sadly, Benjamin Peitzel was not the only Peitzel member of the family that was going to see the bad side of Henry. Henry actually ended up abducting 3 of Peitzel's 4 children, the 3 youngest, and he ended up taking the son and murdered him and disposed of his body in a chimney in Indianapolis. And then took the daughters, the younger daughters, and took them over into Canada, and because their bodies were found, their remains were found in Canada. So during this time, the girls were writing letters to their family, but they were just never sent. And remember how I talked about how serial killers or even murderers keep like trophies? And usually that ends up being their downfall. No one really knows of the actual things that occurred during this time, but I'm guessing it was pretty horrific. Girls did write letters, and they did try to be sent to their family, and they didn't know. They thought that they were being taken to their father. That was the excuse that Henry had given them, that they were being taken to their father, and he was just kind of hiding out because of everything that had been going on and all the ways of making money and stuff. So he was just traveling around with them and doing whatever with them. The reason why I say that is because in 1894, so they said that a lot of things that had happened to these girls were probably really, really bad, and I don't really want to talk about it, but they, the girls were found in this makeshift gas trunk, like a trunk that you, like, put clothes in and they used to carry around, and they were found later on, dead in that, and there were signs of other things that you can probably put to your own imagination, and or you can watch the movies that I suggested earlier, and then you can really know more details that I'm just not willing to share and go into, because it's just not good. On the other side, with Benjamin Peitzel passed away and all of that sketchy insurance stuff, the insurance people sent out an investigator finally, because an old friend of Henry's, Marion Hedgepeth, had done some insurance fraud, but he told on Henry. He was like, I'm just going to narc him out because he hasn't been keeping up to his side of the bargain. And this was great because he was caught, but it was not before he didn't start wooing another young lady, Georgia Yoke. Again, some places show that he was just wooing her, some say it was another fiance of his, and some say it was another wife of his. Granted, I don't know what happened to the second wife, Miss Mirtha. You know, it doesn't say. I went looking, like, you know, inspecting, trying to find out what happened to her, and it just didn't say. So I guess she's out there, and there's some relatives that are, or some people that are descendants of her. Holmes had set his sights on a Texas heiress, and he was actually stealing horses in Texas and shipping them to Louisiana and selling them in Louisiana and making bank on this. So it's like, if he could put his mind to good, he probably could have done a lot of good in the world, but instead he put his brain into murdering and thievery and fraud and all of that. Once the inspectors kind of got into this, they inspected the castle. So this murder hotel, this murder castle, was finally getting inspected. Now, Holmes was there at the time, and he was probably, like, he had these bags of parts, and he was leaving. He was like fixing to leave out to probably go deliver some. But the cops showed up, and they're like, hey, what's in the bag? And he gave them some kind of excuse which seemed to appease them. But later on, he set fire to the entire first floor and to destroy evidence. Because he felt like, hey, I'm being closed in on. I need to get rid of any kind of evidence I can start getting rid of. So that's what he did. He started getting rid of stuff. And this investigation went all over the place. As you can probably suspect, it went to Indianapolis and Canada. And that is where the Peitzel children were found. The letters of the daughters were found also saying that they were with him. And so that confirmed like whereabouts there. Like I said, he kept those, and it tied him right into those girls, which they knew then that he had murdered them. Charles Chappell, I did not see anything that he had been convicted of. However, maybe because he handed over the last bits of the bones and was just like, probably like, here's the bones, I'm out, this is all I did, I don't want to get up in this, I was just making this for the medical schools. During the inspection that they came back and did another inspection on the castle, they found numerous bits and pieces and bones. It's like he got sloppy about getting rid of stuff. And they found bodies that were so badly decomposed and parts of bodies that were so badly decomposed that they really cannot put a number on how many people he actually murdered. He confessed to murdering 28 people, but they believe from their investigation that could be more closer to the number of 200 people. Like he was just on a rampage of murdering. He was arrested in 1894. Oddly, wrote an autobiography in jail and became a best-selling author. And on May 7th, 1896, just 10 days before his birthday or so, maybe a little average before his birthday, he was, of course, sentenced to death, and then he was brought to the stocks and hung until dead on that day. And he is considered the first American serial killer. I would say he's the first American serial killer that we know about. Later on, the castle that he owned, the hotel castle that he owned, was actually bought, renovated, and was going to be turned into like a museum, like some type of museum of his horror that he had done. But it actually burned down before it opened. So coincidence? I think not. Mr. Henry H. Holmes is resting in his place at the Holy Cross Cemetery in Yeadon, Pennsylvania. And that is the story of America's first known serial killer, with a death count of possibly up to 200 people. He ultimately found his own death by hanging, and it was a very long story. And I hope you guys enjoyed this, and please go ahead and hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. I try to upload at least once a week. If you really liked it, then go ahead and hit the like button, and don't forget to maybe even put a comment down. I like hearing from you guys. Also, my information on Instagram is listed down below in the descriptions. Thank you so very much for watching, and as always, be kind to each other, stay awesome, have a fantastic day. See you next time.